Testing 1, 2. Good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. Okay.
I did. We are going to begin in about 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Allen, and I'm a member of the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group here at the Church of the Redeemer. Welcome to those who've joined us in person and those who are joining us via YouTube. And for those of us who are here, if this is your first visit to Redeemer, the washrooms are at the back on your right. So here's a bit of an order for our time together this afternoon. Sandra Campbell will shortly open our time together with drumming and a smudge. Douglas Sanderson, our guest speaker, will be introduced. He will speak. This will be followed by a Q&A. There'll be a mic here, so those who have questions, please go to the mic and ask your questions clearly and concisely. And those on YouTube, Morgan will be monitoring and will signal to me that there's a question, and he'll read out the question. At the end of our Q&A, Pamela Thompson, also a member of the Indigenous Solidarity Working Group, will thank Professor Sanderson. Then we will break, and there will be homemade cookies and coffee at the back of the church. Sandra Campbell.
Sego Skana. My name's Sandra Campbell, and I come from Kahnawake Wata Mohawk First Nation in the Muskoka region, not too far. Lovely little community. But I live and I work and I play in Treaty 13, known as Toronto Purchase, Toronto. So I was asked to do a quick opening prayer and acknowledging our speaker, and also opening song. And at the end, I'll close it with a song. And if you don't know me, like I just introduced my name, but I'm also from the Wolf Clan. And I've been invited many times at Church of Redeemer to do this, but also too, I do work, this was my home church, but now I've, went to the other side to Trinity St. Paul United Church. Pam's in the back there crying. It's where the Creator has taken me to. So I used to question how and why I got involved in this work, but I gave up questioning why or how. It just happened. That's where the Spirit came in and brought me. So I'm going to start a smudge. Unfortunately, I don't have a helper, not unless I can get that person in the back there to carry the smudge. Yeah, you can carry the smudge pot if you like. If you're shy, it's okay. Okay, well, come on up. It's usually a community thing we do. I asked this young gentleman, because it's the speaker's son. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Otis Sanderson. I'm Douglas's son. That's about it.
So I usually talk about the sage, and I'm very happy to say that this sage wasn't store-bought. It was grown with a bit of help from some women in the community, in the Toronto Indigenous community, and they take the time for it to grow. And we go out there once in a while and sing to it, because we know the importance. But the smudge is just to prepare us to become as one, and that one mind, so that we can come out and we do our eyes so we can kind of see the truth. And we do our mouth so, we can say kind words to everyone as we interact. We do our hearts so that we can open up, so we can get that good message that our speaker is going to share today. And I also do my arms, because today my hair's not in a braid, but just to recognize Mother Earth and following our original instructions to take care of what the creation. I do the front of me, so kind of quickly, so I can walk in a good way, so I'm not mean to everyone. I do my back, because I am a 60 scoop survivor. And my mom's an Indian day school survivor, and my grandmother is a residential school survivor. So that makes me an intergenerational survivor. And there's things that hold me back, so I can't do this good work. So I have to put that behind me. And each person will smudge in a different way. So just basically, and then I'll do my head, so I have that clear thinking and that good thoughts. Because I was always told that we start off as a spiritual being. And when we come to this world, we're still spiritual. And everything has life. So I like to say, Creator, you give us thanks for all you are and all you bring to us while we live in your creation. I like to acknowledge that eastern doorway, that doorway of new beginnings as we enter into this world. And like I mentioned, as a spiritual being, and the new beginnings, the new starts. And if there's certain things I have not mentioned, or if I'm unaware of at this particular moment, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Gee, miigwech, nawagoa, great gratitude. And then as we're moving along in our spiritual path, I'd like to acknowledge that southern direction, the direction of energy, the direction of our southern neighbors. And also where our youth sit, where they have a lot of energy. We have to admit, when you watch our grandkids running around, we're like, whoa, where do they get all that energy? And if there's certain things I have not mentioned at this particular moment, or if I'm unaware of, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Jimikwich, Nawagoa, great gratitude. And then I'd like to acknowledge that western direction, the direction of the unknown. And that's the western doorway, the doorway that we walk out of. And today I cannot give you a true, honest description of it, because that's the doorway to the other side, to the realm. And now I know people have had near-death experiences, but they have not truly entered that door. They've only gotten a little peek. But also, that's the direction where our adults sit, and also the direction where that we bring in fall time, our harvest, so that we could survive the winter. And if there's certain things I have not mentioned at this particular moment, or if I'm unaware of, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Jimikwich, now Agoa, great gratitude. And as we're continuing on into our spear, I like to acknowledge that northern direction. This is the direction where our elders sit with the long, gray, snowy hair. These are the individuals that we present our tobacco ties to, so that we could get some good direction in our lives. It could be someone that we hold in the high esteem. They could be an employment counselor. They could be a grandmother, struggling, as when she was a mother, and how to raise children, and she's done her complete life. It could be, anyone that we want some answers to. So I'd like to, and it's also a direction of wintertime, and I'd like to mention about self-care. When you're hungry, you should take the time to eat. And when you're tired, it is a time to rest, just like Mother Earth does in the wintertime. And she's resting, but a lot of things are happening under the ground. But it's to build that strength so you can complete that circle. Thank you very much. Now I'll go. And then I'd like to acknowledge our ancestors, the ones that went ahead of us, and they've made a good life for us today. They could be a grandma, a grandpa, an auntie, an uncle, anyone that you hold in high esteem that have went ahead of you. If there's certain things I have not mentioned at this particular moment, or if I'm unaware of, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Jimikwich, Nawagoa, great gratitude. And then I'd like to acknowledge Mother Earth and all the beings, the ones that provide us with our good life today. And they provide us with all our clothing, all our food, all our shelter, even the minerals and the resources that are put in microchips. I like to acknowledge that. If there's certain things I'm unaware of at this particular moment or have not acknowledged, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Jimikwich, and now Agoa. And as we enter into that center, the center of balance, the balance of creation, and as we walk together learning, and our brothers and sisters hand in hand, let's remind ourselves to be kind and gentle to each other, but to be truthful. A time to listen, a time to share. And I like to say, if there's certain things I have not mentioned at this particular moment, or if I'm unaware of, I'm going to acknowledge that now and say, Jimikwich, Nawalgoa, great gratitude. And now that we are of one mind, I like to say, Jimikwich, 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 Ahau. Now that I've done the opening prayer and the smudge, there's no right way or wrong way of smudging. As you spiritually grow, it becomes more involved. But I always carry my smudge pot with me, and I always carry my tobacco and the work that I do. And I'm going to start off with a Mi'kmaq song, because we're starting in the eastern direction. It's a welcoming song, and I just thought I'd mention that. So I just thought I'd mention that Maggie Paul brought that song to Toronto in the mid-90s to the Toronto Indigenous women, and we're able to carry that song and sing that out and start that. It's usually a gathering song to come people and calling them out. And I acknowledge each direction. So I'm going to pass it over back, and we'll continuing on and hear this exciting speaker.
Thank you, Sandra, for opening our time together in a good way. Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, Douglas Sanderson, is Beaver Clan from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. He currently holds the Prichard Wilson Chair in Law and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. He's been deeply engaged in Indigenous issues from a policy perspective for over 20 years. His scholarship focuses on Indigenous institutions, post-colonial reconciliation, and rebuilding community. He has been the Visiting Indigenous Scholar here at Redeemer for the past 3 years. And this, sadly, is his final talk in terms of that commitment. But he should know that he's always welcome back. He is a co-author with Andrew Stobo Sniderman, A Valley of the Birdtail, an Indian Reserve, a White Town, and The Road to Reconciliation, which we have read and studied here at Redeemer. And I also understand that he's working on a new book, and he may say a few words about that during his talk. The title of his talk today is The Responsibility of Being Human in a World of Others. As with his previous talks, we can expect a thoughtful and insightful lecture. Douglas.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Stephen, for that warm introduction, and Sandra for the beautiful prayer and song. Nitiki san amo banashi, misknidodem. So my Cree name, Amo Banashi, means hummingbird, and I'm from the Beaver Clan of the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. So I want to thank Stephen, of course, for organizing today. Always does a fantastic job. And Morgan, tech guy, thank you so much. Keeping the online world and the in-here world together. And also, I want to single out Pam Thompson, who was the first to invite me here to give these talks, and has served, for me at least, as an inspiration and aspiration ever since. Now, I took up this post as scholar in residence in 2022, and in that time, I've had the immense privilege of speaking on a wide range of topics. Together, we have explored wampum diplomacy and treaties and forms of justice and condolence and mourning, Indigenous identity, Aboriginal rights, and how we might move together to build a world where Aboriginal and settler Canadians live side by side under a condition of equality. Now, I think all of those talks are actually on the Redeemer website if you want to check them out. But I have also combined many of those lectures with some other writing and some other essays as the backbone of a new book called We Were Once Brothers, to be published by HarperCollins, likely early next year. I say all of this because A, it's always good to plug your book, and B, because I wanted you to know that the spirit of my time here at the Redeemer will live on and be available to so many more people in book form. So before I get to my talk today, let me just say how grateful I am to have had this opportunity. This place and this venue has been a forum to work out new ideas in a warm and loving space. I can't tell you how important that is. A lot of the ideas that we've talked about are well outside the mainstream discussion and discourse of Aboriginal settler relations. These are new ideas, new ways of thinking about the relationship, and I am so lucky to have had the chance to work through some of these ideas with you as my guide. So thank you. My topic today, the responsibility of being human in a world of others. I was saying earlier that it's actually a little bit of a curse that one of my main talents in life is coming up with good titles. Does not always mean that what follows will be amazing, but I will do my best. So the German philosopher Friedrich Hegel took seriously his observation that we humans live in a world that consists of things and others. And taking that observation seriously meant thinking seriously about what it means to live in a world of things. And this led Hegel to theorize that, property was probably going to be a necessary part of human development. We need property, Hegel said, because the way we interact with things, the things in our lives may be inanimate, but things also carry something of us in them. You cherish your father's watch because the watch is more than a watch. It's an object that is somehow imbued with your father's spirit. And the longer we have things in our possession, it feels like the more of ourselves gets inside and invested in the item. And so Hegel thought property mattered to humans because the things in our world carry some semblance of ourselves. And so something of ourselves would be compromised if anyone could just come along and take anything for themselves. In some sense, Hegel thought our dignity as human beings depended on a coherent relationship with the things in our world. But there is also, on Hegel's view, people in the world, as a matter of fact, others with whom we must interact. We are naturally social beings, so we need one another just to stay sane. But we also need one another to do things together so that we can do things that no one can accomplish alone. My wife has an uncle who was a super self-sufficient guy. He planted these black walnut trees on his property so that 20 years later, he could harvest the trees and then mill the lumber, and then he made gun cabinets, and then he got steel and milled his own guns. And he could do all of this on his own. But the reason he was doing it all was so that he could enter into shooting match competitions. And so without others at the end, all of the stuff he could do by himself had no purpose. So we need each other. Hegel might say that interacting with others is necessary to develop as a psychologically stable individual. And while that's true, it's also true that I'm sure myself and you have found yourself interacting with others where your psychological stability was definitely under threat. So it cuts both ways. But on the whole, we need each other more than we need to be alone. So what does it mean to be human in a world of others? Now, I started thinking about this question alone in hotel rooms as I toured around the country my last book, Valley of the Birdtail. My co-author, Andrew Stobo Sniderman, who's in Peru now with his family, traveling about the country, having a great time. His son's doing a lot of weaving these days. Very interesting stuff. So Stobo and I have talked to hundreds of audiences, some big, some tiny. My wife says that my motto should be no room too small. So we spoke to a lot of people, and we always finish with a Q&A. And we get asked a lot of different kinds of questions. Sometimes people want to know, like, what is it like to co-author a book? Or, how did you do the research? How did you decide on the people who would be in the book? Sometimes they want to talk about big picture structural change. But almost always we're asked some version of this. How can I, audience member, or how can we, as doctors, union members, bankers, government officials, school principals, book club members, etc., how can we advance reconciliation? Which is a pretty good question, but there's just two problems with giving a proper answer. The first is that I actually have no idea what doctors or bankers or school principals actually do on any given day. So I just have no idea how to change those activities in a way that advances reconciliation. Secondly, and more importantly, the whole point of advancing towards reconciliation is for each of us to do the work ourselves. What kind of a reconciliation is it if all that happens is you listen to someone who tells you to behave differently? And then you do. Is that change? It's not deep change. It's not introspective change. It's shallow change, if it's change at all, and I'm not even sure it's that. So eventually we came up with a better answer to the question of how can I advance reconciliation as a doctor or a school teacher or a homemaker. And because I'm an Indian, I'll give you the Indian version of the answer, which of course comes in the form of a story. Now, this story was related to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It forms part of the public record. And this is just our version of that story. Now, the story takes place here on this blue-green earth, but a long time ago. Long, long ago, when the world was populated by the four-legged ones, and the insects, and the flying ones, and the mushrooms, and the sea beings, and much plant life, and so many trees. But there were not yet any human beings. And one day, Creator called all of the animals together for a great council on the edge of the prairies. It took a while for everyone to get there. Some, like sloth, moved very slow. Others had to come from a long way. But in time, the council grew and grew. And when all the attendees had arrived and assembled themselves, Creator addressed the council. Relations, friends, said Creator, thank you for coming. Some of you have come a long way, and I would not have called you if I didn't need your help. But I do need your help. You see, I intend to introduce into this world a new kind of being. But this being won't be like you. You are born with instinct. Some of you have the ability to travel across the globe to distant beaches and return year after year. You know how to hunt. Some of you know how to hibernate through the winters. You know what to eat and what to avoid. Some of you have fur to keep you warm. And you're young, they are born, and soon they are walking or swimming and flying. But these beings, these new beings, they will be different. These beings will not be born with the kind of knowledge that you hold as instinct. You will have to teach these beings how to survive in this world. Their young cannot walk for their first year, and they develop slowly and only with years and years of patient care and attention. Indeed, these new beings will be so weak and so dependent that you animal beings will have to sacrifice your flesh for them to eat and your furs to keep them warm. But I will bestow a special gift upon these beings. I will give to them the knowledge of truth and justice. But this is a very special gift. It's so special that I can't just give them the gift. They won't even realize that it is a gift. They won't cherish the knowledge. I have to hide the gift somewhere so that they toil and struggle to reach the gift. And only then will they appreciate the gift that has been bestowed upon them. But I don't know where to hide it. And so I've assembled you animals here today to help me find a proper hiding space. A murmur rose from the crowd. The animals were all whispering to one another, and finally Buffalo raised his hoof and said, "I know, Creator." And Creator said, "Yes, Buffalo. Where should I hide the gift?" And Buffalo said, "Give the gift to me, and I will run it far across the prairies." "That is a great idea, Buffalo," said Creator, "but these new beings will spread out far and wide, and as they cross the prairies, they will easily find the gift." And then Salmon spoke. "Creator, I know. Give the gift to me, and I will take the gift far across the sea to distant lands." And Creator said, "Thank you, Salmon. But you see, these beings will spread out across the land and eventually across the seas to distant lands, and there they will find the gift." And so it went for many hours as the sun set and evening came upon them. Raven spoke. Creator, I know, give the gift to me, and I will fly the gift up to Grandmother Moon, to Nokomis herself, and there I will hide the gift. Creator paused and then said, "This is going to be very hard to believe, but these beings are very creative, capable of building all kinds of tools, and hard though this is to believe, these beings will one day reach Nokomis herself, and there they will find the gift." And so it went. And after many more hours, and as the first hints of dawn appeared in the eastern sky, little Mole stood and raised his paw. "Creator," asked Mole, "what is your idea?" And Mole said, "I have listened carefully to the other suggestions, but I think I know where to put the gift." "Where?" asked Creator. "Creator," Mole said, "put the gift inside of them. That way each of them will have access to the gift, but to find it, they will have to go on a journey within to reach the gift." And that is what Creator did. Now, I think you can see how useful this story is to tell to a room full of people who want to know what they can do to advance reconciliation. The answer isn't with me. The answer is within you. But I want us to think carefully about this story. Why does Creator think it's necessary to create human beings and place them on Mother Earth? What is it about us, we humans, that warrants the capacity for a gift of truth and justice? Well, I mean, we do have some distinctive characteristics. We are, for example, capable of reason and abstract thinking. We can develop math and written languages, and we can engage in complex communications over time. And we can develop and employ amazing technologies. We can produce not one, but a multitude of languages, each one shaped and designed to make sense of a particular place. There is an ethnographer, a guy named Hugh Brody, and in the 1970s, the government of Canada realized that they did not have anyone in the federal government who spoke Inuktitut. And so they hired Hugh Brody as a government employee to go to the Arctic and learn Inuktitut, so they would at least have one person who could communicate in the language. And so Hugh Brody gets on a plane and he flies north. And when he lands, he gets off the plane and he looks around and he sees what you or I would probably see, which was nothing. It's just this wasteland of white against a white sky. And then he takes up residence. He begins to take the lessons. He begins to learn the language. And as he learns the language, the landscape around him begins to appear. Once he has words to describe the place, the phenomenon of being in that place, the experience of being in that place, once he has that vocabulary, he begins to see the world take shape around him. And that's why our languages are so important, because they provide us a unique way of seeing things that we would otherwise not know existed. So we can do that, we humans. And we can do a thing that's rare in the animal world. We can reshape the landscape. Something that's literally only done by beavers who build dams to reroute rivers, and also by hippopotamuses, whose mass is so great that through their migration they reshape the channels of rivers, so that in Africa, then on the plains, when it rains, new river routes are formed because of the work of the hippopotamuses. So like beavers, like hippos, we can change the landscape. And there is a sense, I think especially among today's environmentalists, that before contact, before the arrival of the Europeans, that this was a pristine land. That it was a perfectly and complete natural space. But this is wrong. Prior to European arrival, indigenous people in the Americas worked the landscape. And they worked it so completely that European eyes could not discern the work because its scale was so great. Entire forests were set alight to control disease, but also to create new growth. Growth that's low, growth that's available to so many more species. And other species, like the black-backed woodpecker, only take up residence in lands scarred by forest fires. Early Europeans were amazed by the forests that they encountered in what is now North America. The trees grew far apart. You could actually drive a carriage through a lot of forests along the eastern seaboard. And the trees along the eastern seaboard were dominated by a now almost extinct kind of chestnut tree. I think there's like 2 of them left in the world. And these chestnut trees produced a nut that was obviously shelf-stable, and you could boil it over the winter months and it would produce a porridge. So indigenous people worked the forests. They culled out the species they didn't need, and they made travel easy. But these changes, again, were so massive, so complete, that Europeans could not discern the human touch. And then, of course, given the immense wave of deaths brought about by the introduction of European diseases, post-contact Indians just didn't have the resources left over to dedicate to silviculture. So we humans have a unique role in the natural world. We have the capacity to work not against, but with nature. The forests need us. The wolves and bears miss us. We have a responsibility to the earth herself, not to maintain some moment of static perfection, but to be stewards and partners in an ever-changing landscape. Now, I'm so lucky to have a position at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Law. I get to teach about stuff that I'm interested in. And so I teach a couple of upper year seminars. One is called Indigenous Legal Traditions and the Imperial Response. And it's about Indigenous law and legal traditions. But the course also looks at, how did Europeans respond to the fact of Indigenous law when they arrived here? And my other seminar is called Discerning Law in the Fur Trade, and that looks at the many ways in which the historic record confounds our expectations of an orderly European mercantile exchange. And instead, the historic record provides example after example of Europeans learning to conduct their trade not according to market logic, but according to the gift exchange logic that was the province of their Aboriginal trading partners. Both of these courses are really courses in history, and mostly we spend our time unlearning the simple narratives that we were all taught in elementary school. And instead, we attempt to uncover this rich tapestry of complicated interactions between peoples who were so very different, and yet eager to work together, to enter into distinctive military, commercial, and trading relationships. All of which means I spend a lot of time reading accounts from fur trade posts and the travelogues of individual fur traders. Sadly, there are no written records left to examine with origin on the Aboriginal side, and yet the records that do exist show a strong Aboriginal voice and leave us with at least some semblance of the way in which European and Aboriginal people struggled to work together. First Nations and their settler allies worked to find a common ground and mutual understanding, but they came almost literally from different worlds, with different social and political and economic understandings. To the Europeans, profit was the central motive in trade. The First Nations people had no way to understand profit. And indeed, their worldview made it almost impossible to conceive of something so selfish as profit. In the indigenous world, there wasn't even really trade. The transactions were gifts. It was a gift economy. And gift exchange was the principal means of goods moving from person to person. Now, it's hard to imagine, but in fact, almost until the 19th century, the majority of furs acquired by European traders were obtained not through trade at all, but through a gift exchange that preceded the trade. European traders would enter communities and gift trade goods, clothes, knives, tobacco, kettles, fabric, vermilion, and the Indians would gift back clothes, knives, tobacco, or would give back corn, furs, dried fish, dried meats, things that would allow the fur traders to continue living on their own in the forest. And it was only after this initial round of exchange, just the gift giving, and usually a feast, and often a pipe, then the parties would engage in actual trade. But Indian expectations actually precluded price fluctuations. Nobody was on board with that. So there wasn't even haggling. Most of the trade, most of the exchange of furs happens not through the process of bargaining or haggling or trading, but through gift giving. In the indigenous world, you gave and gave. Families and chiefs in particular thought nothing of giving away their last morsel of food to strangers. At the Huron Feast of the dead were reburied in clan ossuaries, but not before being outfitted in the finest of clothing and all of the material possessions of their families. At one late 17th century site, more than 90% of the burial goods were of European origin or manufactured with European technologies. Trade goods were thus of vital importance to Indians, not for the inherent value of the goods themselves, but rather their importance lay in their symbolic value, their capacity to clothe the dead and to supply the dead with the goods they would need in the next world. There was then an expectation of generosity. Among Indian chiefs, for example, the sign that one was a good chief was to be without goods of one's own. You literally gave away everything that you had. If you killed a moose or a bear, the hunter would take only what was left once everyone else in the village had satisfied their needs. And so the fur trade featured these two social worlds, trying to understand one another based on transactions that were fundamentally at odds with one another. And in reading of these exchanges, we see over and over again First Nations chiefs and diplomats and shoulders and traders urging their European counterparts to be generous, because generosity was an essential component of good relations. But Europeans were not just dense, they literally had no conception of a world filled with humans who prioritized generosity over profit. And so the record has a lot of interactions that go something like this. An Indian approaches a trading post and the trader asks, "Welcome, how are you?" And the answer is, "I'm starving, pity me." Or perhaps the Indian trader might say, "The women of my village have no kettles in which to cook, and the men have no means with which to continue the hunt. We are all starving." But stepping back, we can see that this Indian trader is not literally starving. He might be hungry, but he's not starving. And the women of his village manage to cook food every day. And they're able to do that because the men of the village continue the hunt every day. So why the drama? Why the call for pity? Why claim to be starving? So my students and I have knocked these questions around for a few years. There's not a lot of scholarship in this area. And the most compelling reason that we can think of is that in these interactions, Indians are trying to teach the Europeans how to be human. Demonstrating generosity has not worked. And so how do you get the Europeans to understand? You try to create situations that will induce the behavior appropriate to human beings. Generosity. Indeed, even the language of the fur trade suggests this conclusion. When Indians are trying to explain their view of exchange, they refer again and again to their besoins, in French, their needs. And the Indian view, trade is a way of meeting one another's needs. Generosity is a way of demonstrating one's close connection to another, because this is what it is to be human. And in some truly important ways, lessons on how to be human could and actually did penetrate European sensibilities. The English in particular became tightly allied with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the 5 and later 6 nations. The Haudenosaunee begin every meeting, from council meetings to the reuniting of old friends, to the welcoming of trading partners, to diplomatic meetings of nations. They all begin for the Haudenosaunee with what is known as the 3 Bear Word ceremony. Now, the length of the ceremony varies with the size of the meeting. It can be pretty quick, or it can last for days. Depends on how many people are present. But 3 components are always present. The first is where one party uses a wampum belt, or sometimes an eagle feather, to wipe away the tears of the person they're meeting with. And in the second, the wampum is used to cleanse the ears, and in the third, the throat, so that participants may hear and speak clearly. But let's focus on that first part. the wiping away of tears. The wiping away of tears is a central component of Haudenosaunee condolence. The Haudenosaunee understood that life, while filled with joy, is also filled with suffering. You cannot move through this world, you cannot live as a human being on this earth without knowing something of what it is to suffer, to grieve, to experience loss, trauma. Somehow the Western world has forgotten this fact. We even at times are ashamed to feel the burden of our own suffering. Indeed, in Europe, there was, prior to the mid-17th century, no word for condolence in English or French. Europeans just did not know that it was possible to share the grief of others, to condole those who are suffering, and to take on the burdens of another human being. But they learned through countless treaty meetings and edge of forest ceremonies and trading sessions. The English and French learned to condole their First Nation allies and themselves, at least for a time. The earliest meanings of condolence in English and French date from the mid-17th century and means to share the burden of others, exactly as Europeans were learning to do through constant contact with their Aboriginal allies. But later, as the Europeans begin to turn away from their First Nations partners in the early 19th century, the meaning of condolence in English and French also begins to shift. Condolence begins to mean an expression of grief and not the sharing of it. And so Europeans learned and then forgot that although ours is a world filled with suffering, we need not suffer alone. We can share the grief of others. We can process our trauma and our loss and our pain, but we cannot do it alone. Because part of being human is being with others. And among others, we can share, we can lift up, we can raise our communities, but we cannot escape grieving. But imagine a world where grief was acknowledged and shared with others. And this too, Aboriginal people tried to teach their European allies. Not just how to condole, but how to be human. Now, since the end of the Second World War, the global community has begun to find a consensus on the basic rights that we owe one another. At Nuremberg, we created the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity. We drew a line and we said, no, all human beings have certain inalienable rights. In law, this fundamental understanding of our rights against one another has come to be known as the discourse around human rights. Provincially, we have a human rights code that makes it illegal to discriminate against others, because to do so is to undermine another human being's dignity. And federally, we have not only a human rights code, but also a charter of rights and freedoms to underscore that government action cannot discriminate. So in this sense, human rights are a universal good, a recognition of the fundamental dignity of each and every one of us. At least that is what I thought. Until one day, I attended a lecture by my friend Donis Kennedy. Donis is Anishinaabe, and we graduated the same law school class more than 20 years ago. Donis is also a member of the Medallion Lodge, an ancient order of traditional knowledge keepers that predate European contact by 1,000 years. And there was Donis, talking about going berry picking. And she was saying that she tries to keep in the front of her mind the notion that these berries will feed her and her family, but that she's not the only one depending on them. Bears will need the high-calorie berries to grow fat for the coming winter, and migrating birds will need the sugar for energy. And how many other species, beings, rely on this same harvest? So Donis is careful never to strip clean a berry bush. She takes some, but leaves the majority and moves on to find another berry bush. And then she said, and that is why I don't believe in human rights. The room was stunned. This had seemingly come out of nowhere. And Donna surveyed the room and let the moment hang, and then she added, they're too small. Yes, I have rights as a human, but they aren't more important than the rights of bears or migrating birds. Donis understood that being human, being a proper human, means seeing that humans are but one small part of this great big world. And while we have rights, we cannot be blind to our place as but one set of beings in a world of others. I'm going to close this talk today by talking a little bit about my father, Douglas Clarence Sanderson. He served in the Canadian Air Force for 30 years, finished as a master warrant officer. It was because of my father's service that we were living in Germany, or what was then West Germany, when I was born. So, it's odd to be born in a country that just sort of doesn't exist on the map anymore. I mean, Germany's there, but the West Germany part, gone. After my father finished his 30 years of service, he retired and took up a post as the executive director of a friendship center in Quesnel, British Columbia, which is about 800 kilometers north of Vancouver, about an hour and a half south of Prince George, if you know BC at all. The Friendship Center is a sort of a social service provider. So it's a sort of a place in town where members of the surrounding reserve communities, when they were in town, could obtain social services sort of all in one place. And my father had a really, he had a really complicated relationship with his own sense of identity. He didn't go to residential school, but instead he went through the foster care system, which was about as it was terrible. And he knew that he was First Nations. And we think that he also heard people in his family speaking Michif. But one thing that he was not was a status Indian, right? Like, he was not registered with Indian Affairs in Ottawa. And that was because sometime in the past, 100 years or so, somebody had done something to have his family removed from the treaty rolls. And so because status as an Indian is transferred intergenerationally, once one's cut off, then descendants are no longer considered legal Indians. And so my father struggled, him and his sister, his whole life. Even though he worked at this Friendship Center, and he was a pretty brown guy, almost until he died, he wouldn't call himself an Indian. He said, until the government tells me I am, I'm not. So he passed away about 15 years ago. Sadly, his final years were marked by dementia, and his final months were spent in the hospital. I was able to speak with him on the phone at times, and it became pretty clear, he talked to the doctor, that he was not long for this world. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do for me, and I didn't know what to do for him. So I called my mother. They'd been divorced for 20 years by this point, and not really talking, but she said, "You should go and prepare him to die." And I was like, "Well, how do I do that?" And she said, "You tell him what's going to happen and what will be done to help him." And so she said, "After your last breath, you will awaken to find yourself alone in a lodge. And you will wait there for 3 nights. And on the 4th day, we, on this side, will prepare a feast. And this meal will sustain you on the journey, which will begin when the feast ends. And then you will leave the lodge and you will walk west, following a trail made by those who have come before you. And at the end of every day, you will find a lodge waiting for you. And as you enter that lodge, look back to the east, and see the fires that we have lit for you. And this journey will last 4 days. Along the way, many beings will try to lure you from the path. They will offer you comforts. They will threaten. They will cajole you. But you must ignore them and continue to the west, remembering to look back and to see the fires that we've lit for you. On the 4th day, you will arrive on the other side. At the edge of a clearing, you will be greeted by your clan brothers and sisters. They will welcome and feast you. And then they will lead you to the Creator. And there you will approach the Creator and open your palms and show Creator what you did with the gift of your life. To be human in this world is to be a human gifted by the Creator not only access to the knowledge of truth and justice, but the gift of life itself. And each of us, in our own time, will approach the Creator and open our palms and show Creator what we did with the gift of our lives and account for how we spent our time among others. My father died about a week later. I don't know if he remembered what I had told him, and I don't know what he showed the Creator. I only know that every year we hold a feast to honor and feed his spirit. Again, a spirit that sometimes rests with us as just one more being to whom we are responsible in this, a world of others. Thank you.
If you have a question, if you're here in the church, please go to the mic. And for those who are joining us on YouTube, Morgan will be watching for your comments or questions, and then will occasionally raise his hand and shout out the question. So the mic is now open for some comments and questions.
And my question is, when you told your father what would happen, did he accept it? Did it help him on his passage?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, thanks for that question. And I think so. I mean, I think as he, could see his own end, I think it became important to him to understand more of who he was. And I think that learning about a set of beliefs about what is going to happen was helpful to him, but I will say it was very helpful to me that it made me realize that there's a reason why we have so much ritual around the passing of others, because we need to be able to do something. We need to be able to process what is happening. And merely watching it happen is not a way of processing, but being able to participate in some way, I think really, really makes it much easier to accept the passing of others.
Thank you. I'm going to indulge in the question that I was going to ask first.
Sure.
I need you to tell me a little bit more why the woman picking berries did not buy human rights. I don't quite understand that.
I think Donis believes that focusing on human rights leaves aside an important sense that besides other human beings in the world, we really do need to consider other species in the world. And so focusing on human rights, I think her view is, narrows down how we think about how we behave and what's justifiable, and that thinking about a world where many, many, many beings, or all the beings, have rights equivalent to your own, changes the shape of sort of the moral order of the world. And so I think that is her concern. I think, I believe that Donis still believes that people should not be discriminated against, and that, we should all be treated equally. She just does not prefer us to the rest of the world. No trouble.
Well, I think we're all curious to know whether meeting the Creator and the Creator anxious to know how you lived your life is a widely held belief by Aboriginals. Because that's really interesting.
Thank you. I think that particular teaching comes from the Medeowin Lodge, of which my mother was also, like Donis, a member. And the Medeowin Lodge is it's an order of knowledge keepers that transcends cultural and linguistic groupings. So the Medeowin Lodge has members who are Cree, who are Anishinaabe, who are Sioux, and they meet 4 times a year, at least, for ceremonies. And in those ceremonies, pass on the traditional knowledge and teaching of the lodge, which are similar to, but not the same as, ceremonial events and times within those other communities. So, for example, in Cree and Anishinaabe culture, there is a coming-of-age ceremony for young women involving a berry fast. They're slightly different between Cree and Anishinaabe society, but then there's also separately a Medeowin version of the coming-of-age berry fast ceremony. And so it's a, almost imagine an intellectual order that has members from the various First Nations language groups. And shares similar kinds of ceremonial life, but distinctive ceremonies. And so I think that the version of that story that my mother told me was specific to the Medeowin Lodge itself, but it doesn't sound unfamiliar from a Cree perspective either.
I'd like to say thank you very much, Douglas, for sharing. I get it, and I was kind of sitting there going, oh no, he's doing my my opening prayer. So it was very interesting, and I'd like to talk about that as similar but slightly different concept of, I know we say creator, but you know, some people like to say that great spirit, a spirit. And I've heard around, even in the church arena, where they say, oh, you know, the creator, you know, God, you know, and they say he, and I'm like, huh? And I had to wrap my head around that when I was studying at seminary, because I was brought up to say that great spirit has no gender. So, yeah, so it's interesting, like I know you're saying, but I get it. Sometimes it's just easier to say creator, right? But it's that big, great spirit. So I just like to share that. But I also know in the Haudenosaunee, we have our cultures and ceremonies and so forth. And believe it or not, there was a time we were at war. However, we went into peace. Even before pre-European contact, and that's where you get into the dish with one spoon. Yeah, so there are a lot of similarities, but little tweaks, depending on if you're a hunting, gathering nation or a farming nation, but it all comes down to be the same. So thank you for sharing.
I really enjoyed your talk, and really fascinated about how language impacts our reality and how we interact with the world. And in the concept of gift giving and the clash of cultures between the settlers and the First Nations people who are here. And I'm really curious to know if you have a sense of how universal that concept of gift giving is. We certainly was an experience with the settlers here in North America, but other cultures, other places in the world, how universal is that concept of gift giving?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that interesting question. So, you know, in diplomatic circles, gift giving still really matters, and I think that is in part because it echoes through from a much older tradition. I did just hear the other day that J.D. Vance met the Pope, and the Pope gave J.D. Vance to give to the president a pen made out of olive wood, and J.D. Vance, on behalf of the president, gave to the Pope a small crystal football. So maybe they have forgotten the importance of gift giving. It's also true that in the common law, gift giving is really, it's like I tell my students, it's really highly under-theorized for some reason. It's a part of the law that, you know, has some basic rules, but not a lot of theory around it. And within Europe, the gift has been, you know, there was a time in France after one of the revolutions where the government banned gift giving altogether, because they wanted to try and avoid, you know, family dynasty wealth. And so they couldn't really ban inheritance because they knew families would find some other way to get around that, that ban. And so they just made it illegal for anyone to give a gift to any other person. And that law was on the books for like a few years in France. So it's had a tenuous relationship in Europe as well. But beyond that, I don't know, but how far that extends into the West. I think among East Coast, you know, the feast and the potlatch tradition is again a gift-giving tradition. So I think that these are ways that Aboriginal cultures have used historically and in the contemporary world, as a way of expressing, you know, a fondness and an appreciation for each other. You know, in our community, sort of any time we have a ceremony of some kind. We then also have a giveaway ceremony where you lay out a blanket, and then you just put onto the blanket all of these items and invite people as they're leaving to come and to take something. And you provide, or the gifts are always the same sorts of things. They're like wooden spoons and tea towels. Sort of the idea is like they're the things that you give to someone you love so that they can take better care of themselves. Right? And so that tradition is an echo still of that sort of early fur trade relationship, right? Where Europeans were exposed to this idea that the way we show that we appreciate one another in a relationship is through this generosity of gift giving, which, the legal theory mind says, oh, it's also a way of creating obligation, which I think it also is. And so those early manifestations within the fur trade demonstrate the sort of the wider principle that we give gifts of a kind that are designed to allow a family member or a close friend to take better care of themselves through simple items.
There are two questions online.
Oh.
One of them is somewhat related to what you were just answering. Joe asks, some settlers recognize the limits of market logic, in parentheses, climate disaster, weaponizing relationships, etc. But what are the limits of gift exchange logic, in parentheses, projects of national interest, land theft? And there's a question after that too, but I'll let you answer that one first.
So I take the question to be about the vitality of gift giving sort of in the present day. Was that the crux of it?
Maybe the contradiction of that. I can try and read it to you again. Some settlers recognize the limits of market logic, in quotes. And then in parentheses, climate disaster, weaponizing relationships, etc. What are the limits of gift exchange logic?
Oh, right, yeah.
So maybe as it's offered to Indigenous people.
Right. Yeah, so, I think you're right. The climate certainly is a good example of market failure and a way in which the markets are unable to account for, or maybe they're unwilling rather than able to account for the kinds of externalities that lead us into global warming. The gift giving as a logic, it also fails at times. I think that the whole discourse around pity and be starving just demonstrates that in order for that logic of gift giving as a social practice to work, is you have to have everyone involved reciprocating. And that's equally true of potlatches on the West Coast as I think it is of these gift exchanges that mark the fur trade. And so gifting is not, it's not free of problems. But I think it's the only kind of exchange order that you can really resort to if profit is not the central motive of the exchange.
Great, thank you. Bianca asks, how can we help our young to appreciate the unique connections with human stories, traditions, and the natural world?
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for that question. I think that the secret is probably to one, read widely, but also there are, really a wide variety of very interesting ways to engage with Aboriginal cultures. And there's something about the actual doing of stuff that helps you to learn a lot more than sitting in a classroom. So, for example, the Bata Shoe Museum offers a class where you can go and you can learn to make moccasins. It's hard to appreciate how complex they are as a technology until you set about to actually trying to make them. There's drum making workshops that are run out of a variety of places across the city. And then there are, at Six Nations, they do a reading of the creation, their creation story, and also separately, they relate the tale of the coming together of the 5 nations, and do it in English and also in Mohawk. And so I think those are also really, really compelling ways of learning about the culture. Museums are kind of boring and like a little weird, honestly. So instead of like going and just like looking at stuff, and also I was in Ottawa at the Natural History Museum there, and they had just this beautiful collection of totem poles and also wampum belts. But the information just sort of says like what it is and where the museum acquired it and what date, but no other context at all. So nothing about how this post tells the history of this particular family's acquisition and maintenance of its territory over 1,000 years. No story about how this belt represents the agreement to settle some conflict between these 2 nations, just how the museum came into its acquisition. And so, for that reason, I think you're better off trying to go and interact with the technologies, learn to tan a hide or make a drum, because I think those are ways of accessing culture and getting to talk with people that is much more interesting than looking at museum items.
Shilawat Cloutier is an Inuit activist and environmentalist, and she wrote a book called The Right to Be Cold. And I'd never thought about the impact of climate change on Indigenous people in the North. And she doesn't talk about trapping or fishing, but the right to be cold, because it's all-encompassing. And so there's kind of a collision between the dominant culture and Indigenous people and other minorities in Canada. And we are now, I think, at a point in our history in Canada where the motto is drill, baby, drill. And so the question is, how will Indigenous people insert their insights into caring for something that belongs to all of us, and where do you see the challenges?
Thanks, Will. So I actually think that, so it's long been the dream that, environmentalists and environmentalism will benefit from Indigenous knowledge. And it seems like it would. There's a good connection. But what nobody ever really sort of does is talk about how is that going to happen? What are the mechanisms of making that happen? And I did, years ago, have a grad student, I was just invited to sit on her committee. She was a PhD student in the Department of Forestry. And so she had this idea that the Wolf Clan members of this community, that their health rose and fell with the actual wolf population in that area. And so she was going to, trap wolves and, check out their health, and then also, do health scores of people over 10 years to see if she could track this. So, I think that's a way of knowledge, by focusing in really, really tightly. But instead, I think that a more useful way of eliciting that interaction is through communities developing written versions of their laws over their traditional territories, and then allowing those laws to come into conflict with federal and provincial law so that we can start sorting through who truly has jurisdiction over this area. It also means that First Nations are in the position of explaining why they have these particular rules, which allows that discussion around the environment to come in. So I think, like, for a long time we've had this view that Aboriginal law is oral, we know in our heads, and I think the time for that has clearly passed. And acknowledging that writing law down changes it. It's not the same after you write it down. But the world has in fact changed quite a bit, and we, I think Aboriginal people, need a way of asserting our knowledge in the world, and one way of doing that is through writing down and asserting our law and allowing it to come into conflict with other laws as a way of creating that legal space for those ideas.
So I'm tall. I really liked your connection between language, with the fellow who went up to sort of the north to learn Inuktitut, and then you sort of talked about the entry and then sort of removal of condolence as in its meaning and how that related to people. And it sort of made me wonder, presently many of the talks that people have, I'm thinking more sort of governmentally, about reconciliation and whatever that means and however we can work towards whatever it is. A lot of it, probably a vast majority of it happens in English. And it's sort of this restriction that we have because it is just, because, it's, well, I guess French. But, it's sort of same issue there, which is that we have this sort of, we're sort of stuck in this one way of speaking. And, it's hard to be well, let's just talk in the Indian language because first of all, which one? And also there's not a lot of speakers. And so I don't know, I was just wondering perhaps if something like that had sort of been a thought of yours, or the actual use of what languages we speak to discuss policy and such was sort of ever on your mind about things like this.
Thanks, Otis. Great question. I remember sometimes I would ask my mother to translate, or what's the Cree word for this? And she would almost never say, it's this. She'd always go away. And what I learned was that what she was doing is she was going and she was consulting with a bunch of people, other native speakers. Basically putting together a little mini committee every time. Because the translation, the ideas are nuanced, there's different ways of expressing that same idea, and she wanted to be sure that she got it right. So getting it right is hard, and it takes time, but I have a friend who works at this law firm, and for about 10 years he's been working on this project where Ontario Hydro wanted to build a hydro line up into the Ring of Fire. And it was going to affect all these communities along the route, and so they all needed to agree that they were going to engage with this project. And one of the conditions that the communities put on the construction of the transmission line was that it had to be done only according to their law. And Hydro and the province of Ontario said, well, okay, can you tell us what that is? And they said, no. we don't know yet. We don't know. And so my friend Bryce's job is to work with these communities to have them attempt to illuminate the concepts of law that govern their community relations, and then find a way of expressing those ideas in Cree or in Anishinaabe, which I think is a way of trying to maintain a kind of sovereignty over the ideas themselves, rather than being sort of trapped within this version of the English or the French words, which have a very distinct meaning and history. And so expressing those legal ideas within Aboriginal languages, I think, allows those communities to maintain a sort of sovereignty over the ideas themselves.
Cool.
All right. Thanks.
I have a question. Tomorrow, on Monday, the Grassy Narrows has a court appointment to defend their nation's land against contamination by mining. And talking to my congregation, I tried to motivate them by saying it's purely a holistic approach to the environment, and it's been around for a long time. And they said, what about holistic? And I said, well, the government will never do holistic approach to anything. Sorry. Right into the microphone, rock. So I guess I should repeat myself. Wow, this is really loud. Yeah, I think I've reached the right point now. On Monday, the Grassy Narrows will be defending their land in court against what they believe is an impingement on their land, but also what they envision as future contaminations from mining. And it doesn't only affect Grassy Narrows, it affects all the water going downstream, and including aquifers. So, governments around the world are typically approve these kind of activities, and then later on, it's the government through tax money that says, oh, we got to save this resource. And it's the people's money and the people's efforts that has to save it. So convincing people in my congregation to go and be witness in the court seats to show support, I was asked, well, what do we say? And I say, well, it's a holistic way of seeing it. And it's something that governments do not want to do, because they're interested in certain property rights of the rich, and not Mfungo Weinstein, who has a little farm. And so they don't mind losing a farm as long as the economy, the GP, the gross national product goes up. And so what have you experienced with that, with the Western environmental movement? Are they moving closer to the spiritual view of that we all have to share this one planet? Or is it only astronauts that are buzzing around the world?
Thank you for that. So, I think that well, first of all, I should say, I'm not familiar with the details of this phase of the Grassy Narrow case, because it's been going on for a really, really long time, and has to do with a mill that contaminated their water. Basically, the entire community is suffering from a kind of mercury poisoning. So it's pretty bad. So I think, again, I think that there's always a question about how does indigenous knowledge and ways of being interact with, other orders, and in this case, sort of environmentalism more broadly. And in some ways, I sort of think like the way I imagine those, merging. I used to sort of think that there would be some kind of a mechanism, and there may well be. But instead, what I imagine now is if we are able to create sort of a version of Canada where First Nations people have jurisdiction over, larger groupings of land, and that they were able to tax, and so to get out of the federal transfers from the Indian Act, et cetera. I think that those communities would really, really thrive in a lot of ways. And I think one of them would be the adoption of environmental technologies. And that, instead of Indigenous knowledge sort of feeding into the environmental movement and then that, infusing out into society, instead I see or I would hope to see a world where Aboriginal innovation, Aboriginal technologies, Aboriginal ways of thinking about putting together these technologies and their place on the landscape and their role is allowed to develop independently. And I think that once that has begun to happen, that environmentalists more broadly will look to what Aboriginal people are doing and the ways that they are thinking about it, and from there begin to adopt some of those same ideas and technologies and ways of thinking and knowing. I just don't see any longer a lot of mechanisms for that knowledge and those ways of being to influence that wider movement without it getting something, like absorbed into the ether of the environmental movement, and instead for Aboriginal peoples to develop, distinct technologies, ways of thinking about environmental, and to export those ideas and technologies to the environmental movement rather than trying to change the movement directly. Oh.
Is that chalk or candy?
It's chalk, I'm told.
Douglas, thank you so much. You talked about gift and the idea of gift and what I would call natural generosity. And it immediately I started to think about the Truth and Reconciliation Settlement, which acknowledged, although who knew how many people really understood what had happened. And part of that settlement was to have these assessments. There was so much money, which all the churches put into the pot, except for the Catholics who were named. And rather than simply saying, did you go to residential school? For how long? Were you abused? How were you abused? By whom were you abused? And the money is given. They made every single person that wanted money, who had had any abuse of any kind, sexual, spiritual, emotional, they made every one of them tell their stories. And then people like me decided how much money they were going to get. I was asked to run that and be the chair and so on by Murray Sinclair. And I said, well, how much money have you got set aside for the loss of language? How much money have you got for the loss of culture? Nothing. And I said, I won't have anything to do with it if you can't you can never reply. I mean, I was in civil court for 36 years, and every day was, oh my God, I've got to give money for something that has value beyond money. And all of that went through my mind when you talked about the gift culture. One of the ways that I learned about it, well, first of all, I come from the north, where we're all a little different up there, was reading the books by the Mr. and Mrs. or Professors Gear, G-E-A-R, who are archaeologists. And they've taken all the sites that they've worked on, and they have created novels, and they're in chronological order, sort of. They're fabulous, really good stories, well written, not too much sex. And the one that tells of the intermingling of the people going north on the East Coast from Florida up, and the people coming down from the Great Lakes, and how the interrelationships grew as they went further north. And one of the scenes is where somebody finally makes it to Lake Erie and the Great Lakes, which nobody knew about. They knew about the ocean. For Americans, that's what it was the Great Lakes. I have so many reactions, I might even have to write something. But lastly, I would say that in this whole concept that you're talking about, human, recognizing the humanity and what it is to be human, and the approach to learning about that is that while you carry around the gift of Creator inside because of that little mole, other people had other ideas, and what they did was they othered you. And everybody has been othered for some reason or other. But Indigenous people all over the world have been othered to the point where there's non-recognition of what gifts you carry. And it will take generations to get over that. Well, we better get over the shame quickly and start doing things. I think that's the important message, is that learning, acting, and sharing, including condoling, are what we need more of. To Bianca's question, I can answer her personally about what she can do, because Redeemer has done all the things that Douglas suggested. Douglas, you have been so gracious in not taking an honorarium. I guess the best gift you've had is getting hugs from me. We have made a donation in your name to honor you to the Native Cultural Center on Spadina, which is one of our neighbors, and within our deanery, if you will, the circle that Redeemer is responsible for. We can never thank you enough. And God willing, next year I'm going to pop in one of your classes. And I'll try and be quiet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. This was really a learning experience, being able to listen and to also talk and share. And yes, I did get a lot of what you shared. The importance of listening and sharing and getting active. And yeah, asking those important questions. I think that's what I tell my kids is keep asking, keep at it, right? And that gift giving and the importance of sharing. So, and I'm going to end with the traveling song. And hopefully this message that our gifted speaker shared will keep alive and keep moving. So, and I always said, even before I was here many years ago, and I said, I don't understand the clear-cut mentality. You just go in and take a little bit of berries, and everything will take its rest. You just don't go in there and take it all, right? So, yeah, so I kind of worried about the build, build. But I have faith that the law, and if we keep at it, you know, things will be raised up and our concerns. So I'm not too worried, but we just can't go to sleep and be complacent. Way, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, 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 hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, 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 hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Way, 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 hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. Woo! So there's coffee, tea, and cookies back there. So help yourself and keep passing the message on.